Okay. Well, welcome everybody. So Janet Gaard is back to talk about composting. She did, let's say big pile composting a couple of months ago, and now she's here to talk about little pile composting with worms. If you have a compost pile, you probably have some worms in there. I know mine do, and I appreciate them, but there's a way to do it to use worms. You could even do it under the kitchen sink. I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm sure Janet will tell us, but you can do it in a much smaller space. So with that, Janet and your worms, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. So, hi to all of you. I know that some of you have heard this already. I know that at least one of you, who am I looking at, went out when we did a worm presentation at a school and had a great time. So, as Mike said, we're going to be talking about worms. I love worms. I like composting generally, but I love my worms. I have been doing it about 25 years. So I'm going to tell you what I've learned during that time, and I'm going to tell you about the mistakes I've made. So if you decide to do this, you hopefully won't do the same things I did. Um, Now, Jennifer, we were just doing this, and it was, oh, there. Okay. Um, so today I'm going to talk about what is vermicomposting, why you might want to do it, what you need to get started, how you care for your worms, and how you harvest and use the finished product. So first, what is vermicomposting? It's using worms to recycle food scraps and other organic materials. And the end result is a nutrient-rich soil amendment called worm castings or vermicompost. So castings are worm excrement that have been sifted of everything else in the bin, meaning that it's worm poop. And vermicompost is a mixture of the castings with uneaten bedding and kitchen scraps that have partially decomposed on their own. So vermicompost is kind of the initial to middle part of the process, and the end result is the castings, and that's what we're looking for. So we did do a presentation, Joyce Akai and I, about a month ago about backyard composting, which we both do and we enjoy. But it is complementary to do both backyard composting and vermicomposting. So backyard composting, you use mostly yard waste. So you're using leaves and the old vegetables that you pull out and grass clippings if you have them, things like that. You can put some paper waste in it. You can put food scraps in it. We did talk a lot about putting food scraps in and how to do that so it doesn't become a problem. And the end result is a fairly large quantity of compost. So you can end up with barrels full that you have a really nice high quality compost in your yard. Vermicomposting, you use mostly food scraps. You use some paper waste, which is the bedding that I'll talk about in a little bit. And you may use some yard waste, meaning like some old vegetables that you pull out or some leaves. And you end up with a small quantity of castings. So the question is, why would you want to do vermicomposting if you're not going to get much out of it? And the reason is that it is the gold standard of soil amendments. So that picture on the right is castings. So all that brown stuff is worm poop. You'll see that there's some little scatterings in there. I think that was a time that I used pumice, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And those are little pieces of pumice that did not decompose. But that's what you're looking for at the end of the day. And the reason that they're called the gold standard is because using them with your plants enhances seed germination, plant growth, flower production, and fruit production. They can also curb certain plant diseases and inhibit some insect pests. And unfortunately, I had notes on the side and those are not showing up, but this comes from a couple of universities. I can't recall what one of them is. The other one is from Cornell. They have done a number of studies on using vermicompost. And part of the way that it helps with plant diseases and insects pests, it actually builds up the structure of your plant to make it a little bit stronger so that it is harder for diseases and insects to take hold. And if you've gone to the garden store, you will see that they have bags, and it's not cheap. So you can make it at home yourself. So what do you need to get started? You need a worm bin, a place for your bin, worms, and then the worms need bedding and food. And actually, it should also say they need air. So those are the three things they need. So there are a couple of types of worm bins. There are actually some more, but they're not really the kind that most people use. So we're not going to talk about those. We're going to talk about the two most common, which are storage bins and vertical stacks. So the storage bin is on your left. It's just a regular bin. The stacks, that's an example of a commercial stack. They can be purchased or you can make them at home. And essentially what the worms need are a dark place with ventilation and drainage. And I'm just going to talk briefly about vertical stacks because unless you have already been doing it for a while, you probably won't have one of these, but you may aspire to one in the future. These can be purchased or they can be homemade. So the one on the top is purchased, the one on the bottom is homemade. The pros of these is that you can put a lot of worms in a small space. Theoretically, they are self-sorting, which means you don't have to pick the worms out of the castings. They move themselves out, but I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. And the purchased ones can be fairly expensive. Where can you keep a worm bin? So ideally, the temperature that you want them at is about 55 to 75 degrees. So you can keep them indoors. You can put it in your kitchen. You can put it underneath the kitchen cabinet. You can put it in a utility room. You put it in the garage or where any place else you have space. You can put them outside. Here, I would not recommend that because of our heat. You can have problems with both drying out. You're more likely to attract pests and insects. And so I keep mine in the garage, which I think is a great place to have them. That's the only place I've ever kept them long term. You can see in this picture here, a bin, that's one of the commercial bins, in a shower in my house that we don't use very often. So this is in a bathroom that we don't use very often. And when I was doing my Master Gardener presentation about 6 years ago, it was on vermicomposting. So I didn't have a bin that was ready to take to the presentation at the time. I had ones that were very full and big, so I wanted to start a new one. And so I cleaned this one up. I brought it in the house, and because it was January, it was kind of cold. So I thought, well, put it in the house, and then it will move faster because the worms move faster with the temperature that it would be inside. And so I'll have it ready in time. So I ended up, even though I know how to deal with fruit flies, I ended up with a fruit fly infestation in my bathroom. My husband has been very tolerant over the last 25 years of my worms. He does not love them as much as I do. I did not tell him that we had this infestation in the room. And I waited until he was gone to swat the towels crazy, like a crazy woman trying to kill the fruit flies in there. So my friend Joy, who composts, started vermicomposting when we did our presentation. And she has had hers in her basement. She says that works for them. They occasionally have some fruit flies, but if you've got a basement, which not a lot of us have, that may be something you want to try. Any questions at this point? Okay. So once you have a bin, you need bedding. And this is where the worms are going to live. So on the top there, you can see a collection of things that you might use as dry materials in either an outside compost bin or a worm bin. And those were just things I collected at the time. Um, I find that the best thing to use is newspaper and cardboard, including cardboard egg cartons. Um, you can also use fall leaves, like down there in the bottom. That's one that I did some years ago. I generally don't do that anymore. I find, I don't know, maybe it's just not as soft on their bodies that they didn't seem to like it as well. But you can use that. You can use dry brown grass clippings. You can use coconut fiber. And if you buy a commercial bin, they often will include a thing of coconut fiber, which you pull apart to use. And I do have a couple of bins that I have bought. I got that and it worked fine. I didn't think it worked any better than the newspaper I got for free. Um, this last year, I had some hanging baskets that I had used that had that material that looks like coconut fiber that lines the hanging baskets. And so when I was done with that, I thought, oh, well, I'll use that for the bin. Um, I realized afterwards that it must have had some sort of synthetic material in it because after many months, it was still in there and they were not decomposing it. And so I ended up picking out my worms one by one and putting them in something new. So I would say if you're going to use coconut fiber, be really careful that it's got no synthetics in it. You can use junk mail, just be sure that there's no plastic in it. There was a time that they used to say not to use colored paper because of the dyes, but the dyes that they use in paper products now are no longer harmful to the worms. Okay.
We're not hearing anything.
Ah, thank you.
Janet, maybe turn up your volume on your computer. I'm not sure.
Let's see if that works. Mine's up at 100. You're not hearing it?
No.
I can hear you now.
You can hear this?
I can hear you now, but I didn't hear you earlier.
Okay.
I don't think we can hear the video.
You can't hear the video. Okay, so let me just kind of explain it to you then. Hopefully this will work. All right, so this is a homemade bin. And I have 3 commercial bins that you can see in the background, but I started out and had for a long time a bin that's like the one I have here. And they're really easy to make. Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what it is, you have to have a plastic bin. It has to be opaque. You want a tight fitting lid and you want some sort of tray on the bottom. And you drill holes and you can see the holes in the bottom. And there's, you might read recommendations about what size drill bit to use, how big the holes should be, how many you should put in the bottom. That would just happen to be the size bit that I had to make those holes. And the purpose of those is because you might get moisture in the bin and you want it to drain out. And then I also put, if you can see that there's some holes along right under the rim, and that's so that the worms have some air. And you don't have to worry about them disappearing out of the holes because they're perfectly happy to stay in their bin if the conditions are good, which they will be, unless you make some of the mistakes I made that I'm going to tell you about. And you can also put a little screen over the holes on the side if you want to, so that insects are less likely to get in, but you don't need to do that. And then ideally, you put something in the bottom, and that would be a piece of cardboard or a piece of paper, and you moisten it and put it in the bottom. And then, like I said, I prefer to use newspaper. You may have a little trouble finding that now, depending on what kind of paper you're getting. But you just rip it into 1-inch shreds. And if you're using cardboard, you can just rip it into shreds, or cardboard egg carton, and fill it up about a bag or two. And then you're going to put it into a bucket of water and dip it in the water and pull it out quickly. You don't want to soak it for a long time. And then you squeeze it out really, really well. What you want it to be is the moisture of a wrung out sponge. And then you kind of peel it apart so that you're making some air space, and you just drop it into the bin. And then you just fill it up until your bin is maybe 6 to 8 inches full. Okay, did that work?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I could hear
right.
something, but I don't know. It was like very, very, very low.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
So you may read about putting additives in the bin. One of those is pumice, which I mentioned when I showed you the picture at the beginning. It's a lightweight, porous volcanic rock. It comes in really small pieces. And the purpose of that is to provide aeration and drainage. If you do that, you can sprinkle in maybe a half a cup to a cup. I have done that. I don't think it helps at all. And I actually really don't like it, because at the end of the day, you end up with that mixed in with the castings. You can use ground eggshells. I do use those. You wash them and dry them, and then you grind them finely. I put them into the food processor and I grind them as finely as I can, and then sprinkle a couple of spoonfuls on top of the bedding. And that helps with the worm's digestion, because they have gizzards, and gizzards need grit. You can also use dirt instead of the eggshells, and supposedly that has the added benefit of introducing microorganisms. But actually, there's enough microorganisms in the atmosphere and on your hands and on the paper and the worms themselves that you don't really need to do that. Sometimes you will read that you should start out your bin by adding manure, and I put a question mark there. So here's one of my stories. So I started vermicomposting 25 years ago when my daughter was in her freshman year of college. And she came home for my birthday weekend with a gift, which was a homemade worm bin. And she has always been fascinated with things like insects and worms. And so she thought, since when she was growing up, I became an entomology leader because she liked insects, and we had dead insects in our refrigerator and our freezer for years, that I would probably really like a worm bin. So she brings it to me, and we read up on it, and we get the bin and have the conditions all right. And she had gotten worms. And so we asked our neighbor who had a horse if we could get some manure. And we put that in, and the bin was all nicely made. And we had cleared out a cupboard in the kitchen, and put it in there, and figured that they would have a happy home and all would be well. And we woke up the next morning, and there were hundreds of dead worms stuck to the tile kitchen floor, and it took hours to clean them up. And we finally learned over time that what had happened is one of two things. Either it was very fresh manure, and the pH was imbalanced so that it was very acidic because it hadn't aged, or the horse had recently been dewormed. So my recommendation, I've never used it since. My worm bins do great without it. I would not recommend it, but if you do want to do it, be sure that number one, it is well aged, and number two, you might want to use a pH tester to check it. And second, that the animal has not been wormed recently. So the worms that you use are red worms or red wigglers. They are the preferred worm for vermicomposting. Their Latin name is Isoneta fetida. They're sometimes called manure worms or compost worms. They're about 2 to 3 inches long, and they tolerate a wide range of temperature, moisture, and acidity. which is one of the big reasons that they do well as composters. They're the only worms that live on the surface of the soil. They actually live primarily in the top 6 inches of the soil. They are heavy breeders, which you want because the more you have, the more they poop, and they tolerate handling. And since you are going to be manipulating the bin on a regular basis, that's really important. And so if you look at the picture here, the top one is a red worm and the bottom one is a night crawler. So you can see that they're not real big. They are deaf, blind, and mute, and they sense light and movement. So the reason you need to have the opaque bin is because they don't tolerate the light well. They breathe through their skin, and that's really important because it's the reason you need to closely monitor the moisture level in the bin. So if you have ever gone outside after a heavy rain and you had grass primarily, and you would see dead worms on the sidewalk or the driveway, it's because the soil got saturated. The worms couldn't breathe, so they try to escape that. They get onto the concrete and then they get disoriented and they can't get back. And so they die out there. So that's a really important consideration. As I said, they chew with a gizzard. They eat half their body weight daily. And the more they eat, the more they poop. And they have a lifespan of 2 to 4 years. So you can get very attached to them. So where do you get them? You can get them by mail order. You can get them at a garden store. There are garden stores around that have them. If you want to look at those, I would open it up and look inside, make sure that they look like they're alive. You can get them at a bait shop because these are commonly used for fishing. And if you do fish and you want worms, this is a great way to get them for both purposes. You can get them from a friend, or you can collect them for yourself. And as Mike said at the beginning, he sees worms in his compost pile. And especially as your outdoor compost bin is getting toward the end of the process, the worms come there. And so if you want to collect some, you can go out and just look through your compost pile and you can pick them out and use them. They will be red wigglers. You can get them out of a cow patty. They are called manure worms. They do like cow patties. You can also collect them yourself. I have not tried this method, but the University of Wisconsin says that you can go out and lay a piece of damp cardboard on your lawn or garden area and that they will come to that. Okay, here's another one. So let's see if this one will go. Okay, so you have your bin and it's about 6 to 8 inches with the moist bedding. And so you're going to add your worms. And I collected 50, what I counted out to be 50 worms. So that's 50 worms. Ideally, you would have a little more than that, but that is perfectly adequate number to get started with a bin this size. They will reproduce quickly. You just drop them in and they tend to stick to your hands, so be sure you wipe them off and then cover them up. You don't feed them for the first couple of days. And if you want to, you can put in, this is the ground eggshells, and just sprinkle that on top. And then if you are worried about them escaping, oh, I'm sorry, you want to add something on top. So I usually use a paper bag or a piece of cardboard, get that wet and lay it on the top. It just helps keep the moisture level good. And it also is a really good way to kind of check the moisture level later. So this one, I put one on, I would put one to cover the bottom half too. And then if you are worried about them escaping, you can leave them with a light on, like in your garage for a night or two, with the lid off and the light on, and that will keep them down there. But actually, I don't ever find that to be a problem starting a new bin. I think you just drop them in and they're pretty happy in there. The worms multiply quickly. So you've all seen a worm that has the band on it. So that band indicates that they are sexually mature. And they get that band at about 5 to 6 weeks. And a worm has both male and female reproductive organs. So what they do to mate is two of them get up alongside each other and they pass sperm across to each other. And then they grow a cocoon on their band there. So that middle one is a cocoon. That's my hand. It's not really big. And the cocoons start out like a pale color. They tend to get brown as they get older. They hold 1 to 5 worms generally. And after a couple weeks, those worms come out and you get baby worms. So that picture on the right, you can see down toward the bottom, there's a baby worm that's kind of a dark pink color. And above that, you see that little white thing above my knuckle. First time I saw that, I thought it was a maggot, which I do not like. But it turned out that was a baby worm. They start out white and about the thickness of a piece of thread. And over the next few days, they grow and become pigmented. So they really do go quickly. Any questions up to this point? Okay. So they're hungry and you want to feed them. So you can feed them vegetables, non-citrus fruits, which is really important that you don't give them something that's acidic. You can give them breads and grains. I don't do that very often. I tend to do that when sometimes the bin gets a little moister than I would like. So then I will put a little bit of that in. Coffee grounds in moderation. I don't put coffee grounds in anymore. They do like them. And actually, if you're building an outdoor compost bin and you want to attract worms, you can sprinkle a little bit of coffee grounds on the ground before you start building your bin. And it's supposed to attract them to your bin. But this is another one of my not so good stories. So even though I probably should have known better at this point, about 2 years ago, I had extra coffee. And so I put in a couple of days worth at one time. And for some reason at night, at like midnight, I went outside in the garage for something. And I saw that there were worms on the outside of the bin. And I went over to take a look, and it turned out that there were a whole lot of them on the outside of the bin, and there were dead ones on the ground. And so I went inside, and I don't know what we were doing that we were up at that hour, but I got my husband, and we went outside until 2 in the morning, and we hand-picked worms out of the bin, dipped them in water to try to get the acid off them, and put them in a new bin. So I don't use coffee grounds anymore. You certainly can, but be careful about doing that. Don't give them any dairy, no fats or oils, no meat, fish, or bones, no high acid or spicy foods, no pet feces, again, no fresh manure, and no non-biodegradables. So to prepare their foods, so these things are on the left are things that, just some things that I had 1 week to do something with that was food. And so you can see that there's a dried out hamburger bun, there's coffee filters with coffee grounds in them, and then that little bowl in the front has some chopped up fruits. I think it was mushrooms and bananas or something. So what I do, and it works well for me, is whenever I'm cooking something that has fruits or vegetables or something else I could put in the bin, I ask myself, would the worms like this? So they're the first consideration. And I have yogurt containers and old yogurt containers on my kitchen counter. And they're just there, and doesn't look so good, but I live with it because I like them. And so if I do, I drop it into one of those. And then I say, well, if I'm not going to use it also, for example, I'm not going to put in that hamburger bun and I'm not going to put in the coffee grounds, then I say, would that be good for me to put in my outdoor compost bin at this time, given the stage of my bin outside? And if so, I'll take it out there. And if not, then I put it in the green bin that I have through the county. You can see on the right, we have peach trees. And so we have a lot of peach peels and bruised parts that I cut off. And I put them into a container and I put them in the freezer. And there's two reasons I do that. One is in case there are any pests, it will kill the pests or their eggs to be in the freezer. And second is because it separates the solid from the liquid. And there are a lot of things in the summer, particularly, that are very high liquid, like peaches, watermelons, cucumbers. And so if you freeze them, and then when you thaw it, you can pour off all that liquid on the bottom, and then you don't add too much moisture to your bin. And I tend, when I have the things that I'm going to save and give to the worms, to put into those empty yogurt containers, I tend to chop them in pieces. And my husband doesn't, he just drops them in, and then I just pull them out and chop them afterwards. And it's not necessary. You could actually give them a whole banana peel, you could give them a whole apple core. But the reason I do it is because I want to make sure that the food is covered by the bedding as much as possible. And I have found over time that it's easier to cover smaller pieces that I can spread out over the bottom. And that will reduce the fruit flies primarily. I did once think that if they liked smaller pieces better, which I had read, that they would probably really like it if I pureed it. So I pureed some food and I put that in. That was a mistake. I ended up with that part of the bin going anaerobic without air, and it turned into a really nasty smelling mess for several weeks. So I would not recommend doing that. Okay, so now this is feeding the food. So this one is, I have scraps, and I just pull back the bedding. I go down to the bottom and I just dump it in. And with a new bin, I would probably put in a handful or two, no more. And then you just cover it back up with the bedding. And then there's that moist layer that I put on top with the bag or the cardboard. And that's it. You're done feeding them. When you feed them, it is really important to bury the food and then cover it. Same reason as outdoor. The better layer that you have of something on top, the less likelihood you are to have pests. You can feed them in different ways. So on the left there, you can see that I scattered the food all the way down the left-hand side. And then that is compost that's getting well done. And I would lift that up and I would cover it there. On the right, I put it in a couple of corners. That was when I used leaves at one point. So that's why it looks a little different. And what that does by feeding them in different places, and if you do that at different times, it gets them to move around the bin. And it also helps you figure out what they like. So if you have a choice, you feed that. In my experience, the things that they like the best are bananas and banana peels and watermelon rinds. They also like the peaches. They will eat other things, but those two seem to be the ones that go most quickly. So you need to monitor the bin regularly. During the summer, I do that once, maybe twice a week, because they are more active and because I want to check the moisture level. In the winter, I may go for weeks without bothering to check them. You want to check to see that they have eaten their food, whether you need to feed them again. You feed them as necessary. Do not overfeed them. When you're checking, you want to be sure that they have eaten most of the food that you've previously put in there before you add more. You want to add bedding if necessary. So remember, they will eat the bedding. Eventually, they will eat all the bedding, but you do want to have that top layer so they have some place to move around on. You want to notice whether there are smells. Hopefully, you should not smell anything. That's likely to happen if you don't bury the food or overfeed. But if you don't do those two things, you really shouldn't smell anything. You get kind of a nice earthy smell. You want to check the moisture, make sure there's no anaerobic areas. If it is too wet, you can add dry paper or brown paper bag that's mixed in, but you don't want to just add a whole bunch of it because you want it to kind of absorb the moisture. So what I do is put small pieces in and then kind of mix it with the rest so that they absorb the moisture from the part that's too wet. If it's too dry, you can add a little bit of water. You can see with this commercial bin that there is moisture that drips. They have a spigot at the bottom. So I put a little container at the bottom to catch that. That's called leachate. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But if you have just the big bin, that's why you want to have a tray underneath it so that you can get that moisture out from under it and has somewhere to go. If worms are escaping, it's possible but unlikely that they're new to the bin, in which case you'd want to leave the lid off and the light on. More likely it is something's not right. So it's too acidic or too alkali, something like coffee. It's too wet or too dry. It's too hot, or very unlikely they don't have enough food. Even if you can't see food, there is plenty for them to eat. They can actually live with what looks like nothing to eat to you. They can live in that for months. You also want to look for critters in the bin. So things that you may find are fruit flies, ants, or centipedes. Most of those are harmless and they actually aid in the decomposition. If that happens, you can stop feeding for 1 to 2 weeks and let the bin dry out a little bit. If you have fruit flies, you can make a vinegar trap. You just take a little jar and you take a piece of paper and you roll it up into a cylinder and then put it in the jar, and then you let the top expand so you have kind of a little funnel that goes into the jar, and in the bottom you put apple cider vinegar, and they're attracted to that smell, and you put that next to your bin and they will go to that, and then they will drown in the vinegar. You may have ants. I have only had those once. That happens when the bin gets really dry. That was the one time I tried putting the bin outside, which, as I said, I think is not a very effective thing for us here with our summer temperatures. You may get soldier flies. That's on the top up there. They are probably the thing you are most likely to see aside from fruit flies. You may not see the flies themselves, but you may find the pupa, which is down there on the bottom. I don't mind the flies, but there's something about the pupa that kind of grosses me out. They're harmless. They're also apparently very attractive to chickens. So if you happen to find them in your bin, you just pick them out as you see them and you can feed them to your chickens. You will be grateful. I had that happen one time. I picked out the pupa and got rid of them, and I've never had a problem since. So basically, insects, other than the fruit flies, which may be round, are just not really an issue. All right, so this is monitoring the bin. So here I'm going to check one of my bins, and you just open it up, and you can see the paper on the top there, and it's kind of a little bit dry on the edge. So that's one of the things that you want to check. And then you peel back the paper and take a look, and you can see that the paper is really breaking down. This is one that I did where I used leaves outside. In addition to the fact I don't think they liked it as well, I found that I had to spend a lot of time picking apart the materials that were remaining to get those little stems out. So I don't do that anymore. The food is almost gone, and I don't know if you can see it, but this place, there was just hundreds of little baby worms in there. So they were very happy, but there was not really food left there. So I just covered it back up, and then I go to a different spot and pull it back and put the food in there. And then you dump that food in. And in this bin, I had a lot of worms, so I probably would have put in at least, an additional 3 dumps of food like that around the bin, and then cover it up and put the paper back on top. And you can see that I use my hands to do this. The stuff's clean, basically. I don't mind it at all. People do. And if you do, some people wear gloves. You also have this little fork here that you can use if you'd rather. And you can see that I squirted it with a squirt bottle. So I keep one of those full of water. So if the top's getting a little dry, I can squirt it. And then I also check just to see how much drainage there is coming out. I would take that drainage, because this is drying out a little bit, and just dump that back on top of the bin to add some moisture to this one. And that's it. That's all it takes. Just a couple of minutes, a couple of times a week during the summer. Like I said, once every month or something during the winter. And then you end up in maybe 3 to 5 months, depending on how many you start with the worm castings. And this is exciting. This is what you're looking for. And it has a nice feel to it. It has a nice earthy smell to it. And then you need to harvest it. So there are a couple of ways to do that. I do what's called a quick harvest. So that bin on the left, that's from one of the commercial bins, but you would do the exact same thing with a homemade bin. You put the bin somewhere in the sunlight. So I go out when it's not too hot and I sit in my driveway, and you put something underneath it, and you wait for a minute, and the worms are trying to get away from the light, so they go down. And you take your hand and you scrape your hand across the top, and you get a little handful of castings. And it's possible that there's a worm in there. If so, you just pick it out. And then you put the castings, I put them into a bucket. And you wait a minute more, and you scrape again, and they just keep going down and down and down. So you're just scraping the top layer and putting it in a bucket, and that's all the castings. And you may have a couple worms in there. You will likely have some cocoons. You probably have some babies that you don't see. And when you get to the end, you've got a pile of worms in the corner, and you just pick those up. And like in the right-hand picture there, you just drop them into your new bin. And I think it's really fun. I love to see how many worms I have, which you get to do with this process. And I like collecting the compost. So I think that's great. There's also, if you don't want to get your hands in it that much, there's a self-sorting harvesting. So this is kind of the same principle as those stackable bins, which is you stop feeding in your finished castings, and you give them a new place to go, and you feed them in the new place, and they will migrate over. So what you do is you just stop feeding them for a couple of weeks. You push the finished product over to one side. So you can see the brown over there on the right, and that's castings. You add new bedding to the other side. And this was not one I did, but you can see it looks like they put the paper in the shredder. You put that over on the side, and then you only feed them on the new side. And you put that moist cover on top. And after a couple weeks, the worms, or most of them, will migrate over. One way that you can kind of speed that up, you can actually do it with either the quick harvest or this one, is if you take a banana and you slice the banana vertically and you bury it down there. Worms love bananas. And if you wait for a couple of weeks, many of them will go in there, and you can actually at times get a banana peel that is filled with nothing but worms. So you can get a lot of them out that way. Using the castings. So You can use them on your houseplants. I sometimes just scatter them instead of, I don't usually fertilize my houseplants, but I give them worm castings. You can add them to potting soil. You can use them for seed starter. I use mine in the garden for transplanting. Every time I plant a plant, I grab a handful of castings, put it in the bottom of the hole, and that's how I get started. You can also use it as a top or a side dressing. So I taught this for quite a few years as a 4-H project. And kids love worms, so it's a great thing to do with them. This was one of the things we did. It was an experiment. We got a couple of plants that were as closely identical as possible. So had the same number of buds on them and looked the same size. And then we planted them. And this is about 2 weeks later. And the one on the right had a handful of castings and the one on the left didn't. And you can see that the one on the right has more blooms, fuller foliage. And I don't know if you can see really well, but it dried out a little bit. And so the one on the left has kind of dark brown, reddish color in it. So those leaves didn't handle the heat nearly as well. And so I find it really effective. I think it's a great way to use it. The other thing you can do is make worm tea. And so you recall that there's the drippings that come out of your bin. That's called leachate. It's the drainage. It is not the same as worm tea. If you want to use that on plants, you want to use it on established plants and dilute it 10-1. Worm tea is different. It is brewed castings. And so what you do is you get a bucket, you get a little aerator, the kind that you get at the pet store that you can use in an aquarium. And you put castings in with water. Some places say to add molasses. Other places say that's not necessary, so you find different recipes. I find that it's easiest. I put the castings into a nylon stocking, and then the castings don't clog up the aeration system, but you can also reuse them. And then you stir it occasionally over the next 24 hours and it's bubbling away, and you use it within 24 hours. And you can use it to water your plants, which gives them an extra boost, or spray it on your plants. And again, there are studies that show that this can help with all those benefits that I talked about earlier. Books and resources. So the Rodale Book of Composting, if you really want to learn about different means of composting, is a great book. It has a lot of information. It's what they use as the training book for the master composter programs in California. And unfortunately, we don't have one around here, but this is what they use. Compost City, I know, is available at the Davis Library. That's where I first saw it. I really like it. It's written by a master composter in New York City. And she talks about composting in small places. And there's a section in there about vermicomposting. It's really easy to read. And so I would recommend both of those. Actually, kind of the original guru of worm getting out in the public was this book, Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff. And this is the old version. I've had that for 25 years. And I know there's a newer version out there. She has all sorts of information in there about things that you can do, how to set up your bin. If you have an interest in making a coffee table that you have your worms in, she'll tell you how to build that. There's also an accompanying book on the right there, and I've had that one for a really long time too, so I'm not sure if there's a newer version, but it's classroom activities, so it's got a lot of things for kids in there, which is really fun. And I think I know when we first started, everybody here was a master gardener, so you probably already know this, but if there's anybody who is not, um, a way to find information on the internet is to search for vermicomposting or composting with worms or worm bin, and then add the word university or cooperative extension or master gardener, or you can also do .gov, and that will give you evidence-based information so that you're using the best scientific information. There's a lot out there. And to be honest, raising your worms is not a difficult thing. So some of the things that you might find online can be helpful, but if you want the best information, go here. And unless you have questions, that is it. I hope you will all consider doing this. It is great fun.
Thank you. It was great.
Good. I think we're on time
Yeah.
too, right?
Thanks, Janet.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Janet.
so much.
All right.
So I
Uh,
actually put a question in chat if we've got a minute here.
Sure.
So what are the benefits of worm tea over just, it's a lot of trouble or some trouble over the castings as far as plant health is concerned?
I haven't seen anything about that. I think it's more that it's the ease of distribution.
Yeah.
That with worm tea, you use a sprayer to spray it on. You also do get the foliage. So I think, and I can't swear to this one, but I think that there may have been something about that was a way to enhance, as I was talking about the structure, more that can be doing that as you're going later as in the process as your plant gets bigger, that can be a good way to do that. But I don't know that there's a benefit to it other than the ease of spreading it out among all your plants.
Okay. All right. Well, then maybe that's worth it. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. If there are no other questions, next session, which is the second Thursday next month, Tina Saravia, who is a Solano County Master Gardener, is going to talk about edible landscaping. So how to integrate edibles, vegetables, fruit trees into your overall landscaping plan. And I think this is great stuff. And as master gardeners, I think it's something we really ought to be teaching to the public. So, so hopefully, if you are a master gardener, hopefully you can come, and if you're not, hopefully you can come too, because it's a great thing to try. So, all right. So thanks for coming, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
just before we go, I have a really quick question.
Sure.
So I'm actually a student at UC Davis, so definitely not a master gardener. But I was wondering whether or not I could have access to these slides anywhere, and also whether or not there's like a newsletter or some place where I can find out when these events are happening.
Yes. So
Somebody-
we have, yeah, I'm jumping in. So
Okay.
we have a monthly Master Gardener newsletter that comes out. It's called the Yolo Gardener. And we also have an events announcement list. So if you just send me your email address, and I'll drop mine in the chat so you can just send it. You can get any of that information. And if Janet does share her slides, they will be posted on our website, yolomg@ucanr.edu.
Jennifer, you have those, so you're welcome to post them.
Oh, okay.
And this presentation at some point will go up onto the website as well.
Yeah, I'll try to get it up.
Yeah.
Since I'm owner of it this time, I'll try to get it up today. And
Okay.
it should appear there.
Yeah.
No.
So just so you know, the presentations that we do on Thursdays, eventually, not always this fast, but eventually make their way onto the website. And if you look on the website on the left, there's a section for, I think it says presentations, but it says something that's pretty obvious, and you can click on that, and there's a whole list of these workshops and also others that have been done. So it's a lot of information on the website.
Okay, perfect. I will check those out for sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for attending.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, everybody have a good day. Happy gardening. Good week. Good couple of weeks. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mike.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Thank you guys.